How should I think as an American about vaccines and whether they are good or not? Because there's crackpots and cranks everywhere, including at the heights of the medical establishment, it appears.
That's a tough question, right? So let's just stick for right now with the COVID vaccines, right? So that if there had been an open discussion allowed around it, that it would have been very clear, I think, to most doctors and most parents that the benefit of the vaccine for the COVID vaccine for young people, especially children, was very very small. Why? Because the mortality risk of dying from COVID for children was very very small. So it's the you reduce a small mortality risk to an even smaller mortality risk, you're not getting very much benefit. That is enough to say that any possibility of side effects in that group would lead you to say don't use that product in that group. In fact, Martin Kulldorff and I wrote an op-ed in The Hill, I think, in April of 2021, recommending against younger people taking the vaccine for that, with exactly that reasoning. There were evidence coming out already around then that young men especially got high rates of myocarditis, heart inflammation, when they took the vaccine, with the COVID vaccine. And so the question then is what benefit is there to my child from taking it? That's the first question.
Yeah.
Like if it's potentially large, then you want to consider it. If it's not potentially large, then you want to be more careful about it. The flip side of for the older population, there's a much higher risk of dying, and you're reducing the risk of getting sick with the disease. You're probably you have a much wider range of like how much benefit there could be, and you're going to be willing to allow there to be. I should speak for myself personally. If I'm going to gain a lot of benefit and expectation, and I'm going to be willing to take some risk, I'm going to allow there to be some potential harms, especially if they're low risk, low probability, and I'll still take the thing because I expect to have more benefit than harm, right? So that's the base of the recommendation for older people to take the vaccine. If somebody tells you that there's a uniform risk and you know there's not a uniform risk, if somebody exaggerates to you the nature of the risk on either side, taking the vaccine or not taking the vaccine, and you can get a sense of like, are they alarmist? Are they reasonable? Are they balanced? Are they accounting for other people disagreeing with them? What do they have to say about the people that disagree with them? Then you should be very careful about believing them about the nature of the risk that they're trying to evaluate for you. Second, I don't think that you, as a parent, I do think that there's it's very difficult, right? So, like let's leave COVID vaccines aside. Let's move to the childhood vaccine schedule.
I do want to ask one follow-up question before we expand on the other, MMRs and all the rest. So there's death, but then there's other stuff, right? That's not death, but is in the middle. So taking the vaccine appears to have increased myocarditis risk with young men. Like my son was of that age in that target at the time when the COVID vaccines were really getting pushed. But what did we know about if you got COVID? Like, so if my son got COVID, survived just fine, did that also elevate myocarditis? Did it elevate myocarditis risks higher than if he had taken the vaccine?
So the myocarditis is the calculus around myocarditis is really interesting. So yes, COVID can cause myocarditis. It did cause myocarditis in people. Absolutely, it did. The question though isn't the relative risk of myocarditis for COVID versus the vaccine. The question is, if I take the vaccine, what's the marginal impact on my likelihood of getting COVID? And what's the marginal impact on the likelihood of getting myocarditis if I get COVID? Right? So marginal meaning if I take it versus if I don't, what's the change in the likelihood of getting COVID? It turns out that it prevents you from getting infected, symptomatic infection for 2 months, but that declines very sharply after just 2 or 3 months. Right? So it doesn't really prevent you from getting COVID. You're very likely to get COVID afterwards.
I got the shot, the Pfizer shot. I've had COVID twice since, as an example, personally. Yep.
I mean, I got 2 Pfizer shots in April 2021, and in August 2021, I got COVID. It's so the marginal impact on the likelihood of getting COVID, and therefore the myocarditis associated with the COVID is still basically the same. The marginal impact of the vaccine on, so
Because you
it's the
still
wrong.
get, so you take the shot and then you still get COVID anyway. So whatever COVID was going to do to you, it's still going to do to you.
Yeah, it's
Or
like 2 draws on the myocarditis, slot machine, right? So I mean, COVID is it's a terrible thing, right? It's not like it's nice to have COVID. I wish we didn't have it around, but that doesn't buy us anything, right?
right.
Um, okay, so there's that. I have to say, I think for young men, the risk of myocarditis from the vaccine is higher than the risk of myocarditis from COVID. For older people, it's less.
Really? So it really was the
Yeah.
case that if you gave your teenage son the shot, you were perhaps putting them at a higher risk of myocarditis than just letting them go play basketball and get COVID from their buddies sweating on each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of arguments in the literature about this, but somewhere between 1 in 2,000 and 1 in 10,000 of young men who got the vaccine, COVID vaccine, got myocarditis. I mean, that's too many,
Yeah.
especially since the benefit from the vaccine for them was minuscule.
There is this question though about what to do more broadly with our kids and with vaccination. And I, in general, maybe it's just because my dad's a doctor, traditional MD. I have usually been like, I ask my dad, what should I get? He says, get the standard kind of thing. And I go do it without much reservation. When we had our son, my wife was more skeptical. And so I, going all the way back, my son's 19, you know, I looked into this thing of, well, do vaccines cause autism? Which was a claim. I was even in my doctor's office because we had sort of a little bit of a crunchy granola doc, which my wife picked. And he was telling a patient vaccines cause autism. Do vaccines cause autism?
Okay, so first of all, let me unpack that question, right? So there's multiple vaccines, many of them. And the question is not do vaccines as a class cause autism, but do the particular vaccines that are recommended to be given to children cause autism?
Like measles,
One,
mumps, rubella, and such.
right. You answer the question one at a time. Now, the idea that the vaccines cause autism actually came out of the first time I heard of it was a study in the Lancet, which is a very famous British medical journal. A small, tiny study with I think inadequate kind of methodology that found that there was some correlation. It's the kind of study that would normally be published in some journal no one's heard of, and then there have to be much larger and larger investigations before you study. But it was published in a very top medical journal, and it caused a lot of people to think that the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, causes autism. Now, work that has been done subsequent to that, not randomized work, but like large-scale population epidemiological studies of the sort that I deem as credible in the Netherlands by groups that are not conflicted, have found no correlation of the MMR vaccine and subsequent autism using population scale data. So I don't believe the MMR vaccine causes autism. Now, it's not randomized, so I've tell my friends who are much more skeptical of vaccines than I am and they're like, well, it's not randomized, and my answer is, yeah, right. Yes, you're right, it's not randomized. I wish we had a randomized study that concluded that, but it's hard to conclude a negative from a randomized study sometimes, and so we don't have that. It's also hard to convince doctors to run a study for an intervention like the MMR vaccine that almost every doctor believes is worthwhile to do, and then say, okay, I'm going to randomize some kid to not get it.
Right.
That would be deep.
So I understand this to continue, because the listener who's skeptical, who's made it to this point and is like, okay, now we're getting into the stuff I'm worried about for my newborn. If most doctors believe MMR will prevent measles and mumps and rubella, but measles is pretty, like, these things are not good things. They can be quite harmful. Not giving kids the shot feels like it might be almost child abuse. If you believe as a doctor that this will prevent kids from getting harmful diseases and it works and it's well established. So to do the right, isn't that right? So to do the control trial, you'd have to intentionally follow kids that go unvaccinated and see how many of them get measles, mumps, rubella versus the vaccinated set. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
And no one, very few have been willing to do that, or nobody's. Has anybody been willing to do that?
I mean, what would happen is you'd go to if I were to propose such a study, and I wouldn't because I'd work on other things, but like if I were to go to try to propose such a study, if I could get funding for the study, I would have to show it to a human subjects review board, whose job it is to protect the subjects of the study, and they tell me that it's an unethical control arm, that I'm not allowed to run the study. Okay, so that's that. But so the next best thing are these large-scale, population-wide, carefully controlled epidemiological databases where you match people that are very similar to each other at similar ages. Just in reality, some people don't get the vaccine, and you track them prospectively and see what happens to them. I didn't tell them not to get the vaccine; they just happen to not get it. I capture them in my database, and I go forward and ask, are the kids that were vaccinated more likely to get autism diagnoses later on than the kids that are not? And the large-scale studies in Denmark found in the year 2000, no. The answer is no. They're equally likely to get an autism diagnosis. There are more complications here than this. So let me just tell you a couple of complications. So one, measles, mumps, and rubella are very bad if kids get it. It's bad for kids to get it, right? It can cause death in the kids. But it's very uncommon, in part because of the success of the vaccination programs. So the marginal benefit in a population that's largely vaccinated to any particular child getting vaccinated is actually small. But if everyone were to choose to do that, then measles, mumps, rubella would come back, and you would have the marginal benefit get higher.
So right? What you have is I can choose not to get the MMR and go, and my risks are low because I'm free riding on a herd immunity because most people get it.
Exactly. The other aspect of it is there's a very talented epidemiologist in Denmark. Her name is Christine Stabel-Ben. She has done some really interesting work asking whether vaccines that are live attenuated vaccines, what impact do they have on things that are not targeted by the vaccine in terms of the health of the child? And it turns out that in her work, live attenuated vaccines reduce the risk of mortality from other diseases not just related to the thing that you're supposed to protect. Right? So for instance, the oral polio vaccine, which is not the version that's given in the US, is given in Africa. In her work in Africa, finds that it reduces all-cause mortality for children in randomized studies that get the oral polio vaccine versus who don't. Other vaccines that are not live attenuated vaccines do not have that result.
What does that mean, live? You mean like the virus is alive instead of dead?
Yes. Right. The virus replicates inside of you. So there's like two kinds of vaccines. One kind of vaccine, you give a pathogen that's similar to the thing you want to prevent, that's still live. You get a mild version of the sickness, and then you're better. And then you're now protected against, if you were to get, if you're subject to polio, then you're not going to get it because you've already had that attenuated version of it. The other version of the vaccines are essentially dead parts of it. So that's what the COVID vaccine is an example of this. It's not supposed to, it's just producing the spike protein. It's not producing live virus that can replicate inside of you. And it trains your body to react to that part it's exposed, not to the entire live virus, right?
If you like this clip, we've got so much more where that came from. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.